tab for contracts, as well as $2 million for personal services. So that's to develop the new unit, or oil and gas unit, as well as resources at the regional boards. Okay. Next slide. Can you do the next slide? Okay. So this slide represents our contract activity overview. As you know, Board Member Dodek knows from the meeting last week in Bakersfield, or 2 weeks ago, there's already work that's being done by our experts at Lawrence Livermore Labs to provide written recommendations in consultation with other experts to develop this model criteria. So Livermore is contracted to develop a means of recommendations for state board staff to consider in the development of the criteria. So the model criteria is essentially what would ultimately have the ability, like regulations for both the oil well operators as well as our regional groundwater monitoring program. In addition, the U.S. Geological Survey is on task to collect and analyze additional data and information, since there's really not a lot of groundwater quality data associated or near oil and gas operations in the state. So they're in the process of analyzing existing data, helping us to prioritize in a way in which we can learn more about it as we develop our model criteria. And in addition to that, there's contract money set aside for influx of data that will be coming into the GeoTracker Gamma groundwater information system, required by the well operators, as well as any data that we collect under a regional plan. So specifically, the Livermore contract tasks relate to their main goal, and that's to develop a list or a set of written recommendations for state board staff to consider for the development of that groundwater monitoring model criteria as required under SB 4. Livermore will be reaching out to other experts to develop their recommendations. They'll be hosting public meetings with other experts, with public stakeholders. They'll be reviewing and commenting on draft state board and as well as the USGS is helping us, and they'll go into more detail on that in the next slide, regarding the groundwater monitoring related to oil and gas activity. And the draft abstract is in your packet that we handed out this morning with respect to the concept that was proposed at the last meeting in Bakersfield on August 7th. So they'll be preparing. Could you go back one, Chelsea? For some reason, this is...
Sorry, John, the information that you provided to us, is that available on our website for the state?
Yes, it is. The abstract is posted on our SB4 website.
What about the draft questions?
The draft questions were introduced at the August 7th meeting. I believe they should be on our website, but if they're not, they will be.
And a quick question on the draft questions. Have you been soliciting input from stakeholders as to what the questions should be?
Right, that's the first cut. These are basically what I would consider to be obvious questions that we need to have answered, that are the requirements, if you will, that SB4 is asking us to look at for the development of the model criteria. But any additional questions we should be looking at is being fleshed out.
So let me put it another way. The reason that we're having the stakeholder meetings is to go over the types of questions and the process that we're proposing, and we're getting feedback. We had it at Bakersfield, and we have another one coming up in Los Angeles.
Yeah, Board Member D'Adamo, the Bakersfield meeting actually resulted in several speakers providing, I thought, really excellent suggestions in terms of questions and technical areas for us to explore.
So onto the USGS's role, and that they will be providing technical assistance for state board staff in the development of the model criteria. And essentially, they've developed right now a straw man abstract that'll be more fleshed out in the coming weeks and expanded to a more full evaluation of looking at that abstract. You'll notice that they've taken into account vulnerability aspects. So if, for instance, you're near an area of oil and gas activities and groundwater resources are much shallower than the zones that are being developed for oil and gas, that would be considered potentially as a lower vulnerability area as opposed to areas where there are shallower oil and gas activities or they coexist with or relatively close with groundwater resources. So the USGS will be conducting preliminary assessment of the vulnerability of groundwater resources near oil and gas production. They'll also be testing groundwater to help us evaluate methods for detecting the effects of oil and gas production on groundwater quality and its resources, and also be providing data to State Board staff for the development of the model criteria. Next slide, please. So the last two slides here are dedicated to outlining what our stakeholder interaction timeline is. If you can go back one, I think it snapped for us. Okay, here we go. So basically in August this month, we've already held our Bakersfield meeting on the 7th, and we'll be going to Los Angeles next Monday for another public stakeholder meeting, and those are to solicit input from the public and the stakeholders. As before, was specific about identifying the stakeholder groups. And so we've had input specific presentations for those folks, as well as open to the public to provide them input on the process. Later this fall, public meetings with Livermore and other technical experts will be held. The discussion will center on factors and design issues of the model criteria with the public stakeholders. Later in 2014, public meeting for Livermore experts to hear feedback on draft model criteria recommendations. And then by January of 2015, Livermore will submit a draft set of recommendations for the State Board staff to consider. Next slide. Early 2015, there'll be a public written comment period for public review. And then by this time next year or earlier, State Water Board adoption of the final model criteria is set forth in the SB4. And we implement our regional groundwater monitoring program on January 1st, 2016.
My question is, how are you involving the regional boards and the regional board staff as well as regional boards in this conversation? Are they? I know there's going to be some additions to some of their staff, but that's not in your timeline, so that's the reason I was asking.
I think we had like 3 regional board, either EOs or assistant EOs at the Bakersfield meeting.
That's great.
They're engaged in the process. The interim regs, we've had regular conversations with primarily Region 5 because the bulk of the oil and gas activities are in Region 5, but we've also had several meetings with Region 4, the LA region, and we have, as mentioned, there are resources available for the Central Coast Regional Board as well.
Okay, the reason I was mentioning it is because most everyone lives at a region. They don't live in Sacramento. And so I just want to make sure that they know that regional boards are engaged and that they can be contacted as well.
And in addition to the interaction on an ad hoc basis as we're moving through the process, we also have a coordination meeting coming up. I think it's early September. I don't have the date off the top of my head. Meeting with the management and staff at the regional boards on coordinating our activity. They're bringing staff on board now to support this effort, and we want to start off with having them all join together, all of us together, to talk through how we're going to deal with this. We have multiple interagency issues that are associated with this, so it's not going to be an area where the regional boards can or the State Board can just go off without a lot of coordination. So we're working that directly into the initiation of this process.
Thank you. I don't know if any other board member made this request, but I appreciate this item being pulled off the uncontested agenda and staff providing additional information with respect to the proposed resolution, the contracts, and activities. Having been engaged in this issue because I'm so fascinated by the technical challenges involved and attended the Bakersfield, and I also plan to be at the LA meeting, my initial impression after the Bakersfield discussion is this is going to be we knew that it would be a very challenging issue for us, but I think even I appreciated how technically challenging it will be, and also challenging from a policy perspective, especially when the technical groundwater criteria recommendations are presented to us. So I would just flag it. I mean, at some point between now and early 2015, whenever we can spare time in our agenda, I think an informational item or workshop focusing on the technical aspects for the groundwater monitoring criteria might be very helpful for us to hear from the experts, the stakeholders, and have that sort of a workshop at a board level. I will try to attend as many of the Lawrence Livermore contractor discussion as possible, but recognizing that scheduling-wise, it may not be possible for all board members to attend. I think it will be very helpful for us to have that sort of technical discussion at some point before the proposed criteria are brought to us for consideration.
Great, I think that's a good idea. I think that's a good idea. Even just looking at the handout that you have posted, there's fascinating stuff in here, and it would be nice to go through. I think other people would find it fascinating as well. So I think that would be a great service to do.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Board Member Dodak? We have envisioned a meeting on the preliminary recommendations that Lawrence Livermore's technical staff in end of the year timeframe. We could have that as a board workshop, or we could do it right before or right after that. I'm just not sure where.
I'm thinking before it. I would like to have a primer, if you will.
Yeah, I'd like to get my neural net sort of
all
set
the
for what's
all the various technical aspects, a primer to the board before the contractors submit their recommendation and before we receive that recommendation. And I'm thinking along the line of perhaps, definitely not to the extent that we did for the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan updates, but very specific workshops with very specific questions and panels organized with experts from different representations, if you will, to respond to those specific questions. So definitely a more technical fact-based discussion to really get all of us prepared in order to really understand, evaluate, and act on the proposed criteria, which I believe will be extremely challenging.
Good. No, thanks for that discussion. One thing with regional monitoring, just in my experience in the Bay Area and our success in sustaining a regional monitoring program, and we've talked about this a little during the briefings. If you have any comments, sort of high-level comments, feedback on, as we take on this regional groundwater monitoring commitment, and we're basing it on contract funds that may not go on forever, and we also have other significant regional groundwater monitoring challenges ahead of us with respect to nitrate and other important statewide issues. If there's some discussions about, using this type of program to organizationally create a more sustained regional or statewide groundwater monitoring program that's kind of headed by a science institute or that kind of a framework.
So we are definitely thinking about what other monitoring is associated for groundwater and how we could develop a swamp-like approach where we have regional monitoring centers. But I would caution that at this point we're going to need to learn about oil field and groundwater where we haven't had information in the past, and so at least initially, we're going to be focused on an area that we can't combine with something else because we don't have information there. There is a potential that the shallow portion of any monitoring that may be since we're so early, it's hard to give you any definites, may be combinable with some of our ag monitoring or some of our other point source monitoring for shallow. We don't have any monitoring associated with oil field activities right now, and we clearly don't have any monitoring of the depths that we may need to be looking at. So I hate to commit to something until we find out more information.
Yeah, and believe me, I wasn't asking for a commitment, but just highlighting that, you know, this is part of a larger statewide challenge, and encourage keeping our eye on that long-term sustainability too. Thanks.
Every drop counts.
If there are no further discussion or comment cards, I would move for adoption of this item.
Are there
Second.
any comment cards? All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any
And-
opposition? All right, thank you.
And
very
thank you again for
That was quite
indulging me in
interesting.
discussing
No,
this
Thank
item.
you for doing that, and thank you for going to those meetings. That's, appreciate it. All right, item number 5. Yeah, but I don't see her. Sarah? Where is she? Okay, sorry. Hi.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Jeffrey Albrecht. I'm an engineer and grant manager in the Division of Financial Assistance, and I'm here to present Agenda Item 5, consideration of a proposed resolution to adopt the Drought Response Outreach Program for Schools guidelines. It is my understanding that the comments we have are in support of the program, so I may proceed with my presentation if you like, or we could simply let the commenter speak.
Can you do an abbreviated one? Just
It's
because there
fairly
are people
concise.
sitting there who don't know what it is, they may want us to just keep going, but it's very creative, so I think it'd be nice to.
Absolutely. So yeah, my presentation is fairly concise, so I will proceed. The Drought Response Outreach Program for Schools, or DROPS, was developed in response to the Governor's declaration of a drought state of emergency. DROPS will repurpose approximately $25.5 million dollars in grant funds, unallocated Prop 13 and 40 funds for stormwater capture projects. The DROPS grants will be awarded to local educational agencies or federally recognized tribes to implement projects at K-12 schools. The projects will be designed to reduce stormwater runoff and pollution by capturing stormwater for groundwater recharge or for uses to offset other water sources. The purpose of the DROPS guidelines is to establish the objectives for the funding, define applicant eligibility, provide a framework for eligible project types and the required educational component, and outline the grant amount limitations and required match. As part of the process of developing the guidelines, DFA staff participated in multiple outreach meetings. We also held 2 workshops to solicit feedback on our proposed plan, one in Sacramento and one in San Diego, in June and July, respectively. The proposed guidelines were posted on the DROPS website for public comment beginning July 31st. A notification email that the proposed guidelines were available for review was sent to the LYRIS public notice list on August 1st and the DROPS LYRIS email list on August 4th. Comments were due on August 13th at noon. During the public review period, we received 4 comment letters. In response to several of the comments, we modified the guidelines. For others, we did not believe a change was warranted because the issue has been fully discussed and vetted during our initial outreach and development of the guidelines. The noteworthy modifications include change the term reuse to simply use as applied to stormwater, added language clarifying that fully designed projects are not required and a student-teacher-led design process is encouraged, retained the education and outreach maximum of 10% of the grant, but clarified that matching funds may be 100% education and outreach expenses, and added the definition of a local watershed group. In addition, we met with tribal liaisons from Cal EPA and the California Department of Water Resources to discuss tribe eligibility, and we have modified some of the language in order to assure eligibility for tribal applicants. Finally, we added our recently completed DROPS logo to the cover page. A copy of the guidelines change sheet has been provided to you. Staff recommends adoption of the guidelines, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you for that. Questions before we go to public comment?
Just one question. I was reading the 4 letters.
Yes.
It was nice and brief. That was quite wonderful. Rebecca Drazy had suggested that there be a, in terms of priorities, that some less populated schools may have more space to do kind of bigger things over more constrained school areas that have denser populations. Did you address that at all? Because I couldn't find that you had.
Hi, this is Leslie Loudon with DFA. This was one of the areas that we did not make a change to the guidelines, and really the reason for that was we discussed this quite a bit in our early scoping meetings that we had. Originally, our original proposal was to have a standard max and minimum amount of a grant regardless of the size of the district. And in meeting with a lot of the school districts and Department of Education and the Coalition for Adequate School Housing, they really encouraged us to go with that sliding scale and make smaller grants. And so we went a lot lower in the amount of grant, the lower end of the grants, to allow these smaller schools. And I think because we're really trying to focus so much on the educational component, that we're looking probably at having some of the smaller, smaller projects really at these smaller districts. So that was kind of a choice we made just based on all the input that we had received throughout the program, and that people were looking and really encouraging us to go with that sliding scale of grants. So it was just a staff recommendation not to do that.
Well, I'm not proposing that we do it, but I do think it's something we should. This is a relatively small program, and if we do more of this kind of thing, which I hope we will, let's revisit that issue based on the experience that we get. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah. I thought it was great that you met with the Division of State Architect, and we've talked about this. And did you identify any impediments to in the current system to implement, LID type standards and other things? And are we working? If so, are we working toward updating the Division of State Architects guidelines, or do you think that's not going to take a lot of work?
Well, thankfully, we did have a very good outreach meeting with DSA, Division of State Architect, and they did state that they would be willing to try to coordinate with us. Not sure how that's going to be, I guess, move going forward, how it's going to be able to help us coordinate, but we're hoping to get some good partnership there. But they were definitely on board with it.
Yeah, they committed to expediting any review for the DROPS programs. We're thinking a lot of the types of projects that we're looking at doing really won't involve a real thorough review, because it will be sort of disconnected from the actual buildings. Although, you do have access issues and things like that. So, we're planning a lot of outreach as we go forward. As you notice, the solicitation time is fairly lengthy. So we'll have a lot of opportunity as we go forward in working with them, and as we work with districts and developing their projects.
Yeah, and that was just, my curiosity there was how rigid they are with sort of engineering plans and specifications for drainage, for instance. And it sounds to me like they have, if we can point to something that's standardized, they can find a way to approve it through their process for all K-12 schools.
We believe so. I mean, in some of the outreach meetings, we did hear concerns, from the school facility people with getting state architect review. But as we said in our meetings with them, they seemed encouraging. So we shall see.
That's really good. Just one more thing. So, the timing on this, this is sort of new territory for K-12 school districts. And as you mentioned, there's a large solicitation period. But there's sort of these discrete periods for school districts when they'll maybe do something like issue a bond, and their ability to do these type of projects may be contingent on having that source of funding. Do we have provisions within our process to allow for that kind of time frame that could be a year or so in the making?
Yes, the time frame on the solicitation, we actually have a fairly generous time. The projects have to be completed by June of 2019. So we anticipate, some projects may be able to really get going pretty quickly. We're anticipating awarding the funds next spring, and possibly some could be constructed in the summer, but it's more likely the following summer is when a lot of these, and it depends on, the project. Some of them, we heard from the group on the North Coast with the Russian River Keeper that they do their construction using students during the school year. So, it'll really vary depending on the project.
Yeah,
I think we have a long enough time to be able to accommodate it.
That's good. So it sounds like you've got a sense of the volume of work, in the next year and a half. And as Fran pointed out, this is a small start. And I guess, the hope is this will demonstrate with real case studies how effective it can be. And, hopefully we'll grow the program, but also school districts will just see the wisdom of embedding this in their own facilities planning. I mean, that's a hope.
More local communities will make it a part of their MS4 work and find funding in the larger community setting. I'm assuming there's been a lot of engagement by the counties or stormwater utilities in watching this, because this is good for them, too.
Exactly. We've been trying to help that
Yes.
coordination and encourage it through the guidelines with the MS4
Yeah,
agency.
great comment. In fact, that's probably the pathway the schools will learn about it, is that this opportunity. Hopefully our partners in the stormwater community will help spread the word.
Well, Leslie has already mentioned it, and I think Sarah probably will too, but yes, I definitely plug for Russian River Keepers Clean Campus, Clean Creeks program, which actually has been very successful and have great case studies to show how this could be very effective, both in terms of water, results, water quality results, but also flood protection, education, and outreach. And how did Don McInhill frame it? Training the future LID installers for California.
Yeah, green jobs of the future.
Great. Sarah.
Good morning, board members. I'm Sarah Amanzada. I'm the Executive Director of California Coastkeeper Alliance. And I just wanted to come today to express my strong support and gratitude for this funding and this program. It's exactly the sort of work that we talk about so often in the stormwater program context, about a multi-benefit initiative that can, as Tam said, train young people to care about and know about water scarcity issues and water quality issues, and also in practice really install some projects that will reduce runoff and capture water. So thank you so much for advancing this in such a timely fashion and engaging our groups. Within days of the governor's drought declaration, board member Dodek had reached out to learn about the education programs already in place throughout California. So just really appreciate the board's initiative. I want to flag just two areas where we'd like to see some changes to the funding guidelines. The first is in Appendix C. Under the technical questions 1, subpart 6 and 7, there's a requirement to provide the number of gallons captured in the project. And Don McInhill, in his experience in the Russian River Keepers Clean Campus, Clean Creeks, was worried about this, that it could be too prescriptive, and really felt like it was important to allow students to engage genuinely in the project planning and design phase, and was worried that if they were required to basically design the project and then bring it to the children, there just wasn't the same amount of engagement and buy-in. And so I was wondering if we could find some way around that specific requirement to put the number of gallons in. Don't often argue against numerics and things, but here I think it would be beneficial to allow for some flexibility so that the students can engage in that phase. And then secondly, in Appendix C, under additional questions, there's a question about whether eligible groups are engaged in challenges or legal action with either the state or regional water board, and fully understand the inquiry, but at the same time just want to encourage the board to support applications from groups that may be involved in litigation but also want to utilize the education tool in their toolbox. So just with those 2 points, thank you again and strongly support this.
Thank you very much. The second point, I can see it's not meant to be a screen, it's just meant to be aware, right?
Correct. It's one of our general questions, and it's really that it gets to a condition of the grant agreement that if we fund a project, regardless of the outcome of the litigation, you have to complete the project. So it really is more of a just making sure that applicants understand that by accepting the grant, you're committing to doing the project regardless.
So it is meant to sort of separate
So
the
it's-
two,
it's-
as
but
opposed to
it's-
conflate the two.
Yeah, and it's
Well,
just a
But
standard.
actually, if I recall, there's a little asterisk that says, in the case of a tie, you know, the answer to these questions will be a tiebreaker. So it does seem to discourage groups that have pursued litigation, at least from my reading. And if that's not the intent, if there's just sort of an inquiry that's relevant for grant conditions, then it would be good to clarify that.
Okay, we can make that clarification. It really was more the question number 6 as far as breaking a tie, I think not 7, so we can change that.
Okay.
That would be great. And then
So
on the
would
issue
just
of
be a-
the number of gallons
Then on-
estimate, is there a way to make it so it doesn't require that they have a whole engineering person first?
Yes, and we tried to clarify that a little bit in the change sheet because we really wanted to encourage these types of projects, and we realized there are going to be 2 different types of projects, the student teacher-led type thing, and we recognize those are going to be more conceptual type projects. But as we have in the guidelines, we had to kind of hurry to put this together, and we anticipate developing some templates and information to assist in the application process. And so, you know, we're trying to provide that to the applicants to keep it a fairly simple process. And so we'll be looking at, for these types of projects, at least some diagram of the school to at least, you know, that they've
Estimate.
thought through it and what type of BMP. So it'd be a very conceptual estimate, but at least to have looked at, you know, some idea of the project. It won't be, you know, comparing this versus that, because we realize at this stage they will be very conceptual for that type of project. We may have some other projects that are fairly well developed where they'd have a better estimate, but I think even for some of those, they won't have done all the engineering and geotechnical design yet to really give us a real solid number.
Yeah, I think Don's overall just concern, having done this work for many years in Healdsburg, is just that this becomes a project with a contractor, whereas what they've felt is really pivotal to their success is really it's a student-led project
Right.
from start to finish. And so just, and I know you've spoken with him about this, if there's a way to allow for that in the grant guidelines, I think that'd be great.
We definitely would. One of the things we have is that we will be tweaking the application. We didn't want to actually have the board adopt the full application
No,
because we always
that's
find when we start putting it in that we need to tweak it. So we have given us the flexibility to do that. So as we put together our application in our FAST system, we will be making clarifications like that to make sure that people understand. We're encouraging that type of project too.
Terrific. And I'm sure we'll have a mix. We'll have ones
Yes.
that are like that, but we'll also have ones that really are going to capture real gallons.
Yes, and that's what
Which-
we heard in our workshops.
Yeah.
Please leave the flexibility open, give the time frame. We tried to extend the time frame to make sure we had the opportunity to have those student-led and develop projects rather than, you know, just opening it for 6 weeks or something. We're giving plenty of
Right.
time to allow that type of a process.
Great. Great. Your question? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
With the change sheet.
With the extensive change sheet.
Second the motion.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Any opposition? It carries. Thank you. Very exciting project. I mean, it's been years with also schools seeming to be ideal places, but they just have not had the wherewithal to do it. So it just seems like a really smart idea to help those schools become, you know, even greater community resources on a whole host of fronts. So thank you.
Yeah, we've had a really enthusiastic response,
That's
so
great.
it's been good. Thanks.
Great.
Thank you very much. All right, item number 6.
John O'Hagan and Eric Oppenheimer will be doing the drought update today.
Good morning. I'm John O'Hagan with the Division of Water Rights. I'm going to give you a brief update on the drought activities by the division. at last report, we talked about some temporary urgency change petitions that were filed with the board. The city of Santa Cruz, we have issued an order approving that temporary urgency change. That's extending the temporary urgency change another 180 days. For the Cambria Community Service District, June Lake, those are being processed at this time again, and we have received the temporary urgency changes from the Mendocino County Russian River Flood Control and the Sonoma County Water Agency. Those petitions were received last week, and we are processing those at this time. We have one transfer left, and that was the transfer from Contra Costa and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation to Byron Bethany, and that transfer is being processed this week also. As far as the curtailments, we have not issued any further curtailment notices. As Amanda Montgomery told you last week, we did rescind some curtailments on the Middle Fork, and we continue to look at the Eel River because of additional releases by Pacific Gas and Electric. So there's more flow in that system, and the demand on the water right diversions goes down in September. So we'll be watching that very closely.
Does that mean you might lift more curtailments along that system?
Yes, on certain sections of that system. On the compliance certification forms, as you know, we're still about 36% received, but that represents over 84% of the water that has been curtailed under the curtailment process. Now, that's under the notices of curtailment, not an order of curtailment. So the requirements, it's not a violation subject to enforcement, but we are following up on those. As part of the compliance certification forms, we also sent out the human health and safety additional form for projects. And at this time, we had about 270 of those forms returned. And of those, 59 are municipal domestic public water systems, and 128 are domestic users by individual or non-public water systems. The Division of Drinking Water Program is reviewing the 59 public water systems, and the Office of Emergency Services is reviewing the 128. We had an additional 67 claiming fire protection that we referred to CAL FIRE. And then we had another 36 that were claiming livestock watering and other uses such as home gardening. So those are all being reviewed, but those do not represent a lot of water under the curtailment process. As far as compliance inspections, we still have a field presence throughout these watersheds that we have curtailed. We've done 630 inspections. Of those, after the board directed us, I told you, we were concentrating on the larger diverters, 500 acre-feet or greater in these watersheds. We have shifted that priority to the non-responders of the curtailment certification form, and 20 acre-feet or greater, but still having a diversion season during the summer. So that's our priority inspections at this time. At this time, I think 30% of our inspections are non-responders for the bigger diverters. As far as complaints, we are focusing a lot of our resources now on complaints in the curtailment watershed areas dealing with unauthorized diversions. We are working with Division of our Department of Fish and Wildlife on certain complaints in dealing with bulk water hauling, and we are focusing on those to make sure that, that those diversions are prevented if they are indeed unauthorized. We also have some letters in requesting us to implement a reg authority for looking into illegal use of stored water, and we've received several other comment letters regarding that issue, and we are reviewing all of those letters closely, and we hope to make a recommendation to the board in the near future. And I think that's all I have. Do you have any questions?
One question, there's quite a big chunk of folks who did not respond, the non-responders. I mean, there were a lot, thousands.
There were a large group of people that did not respond, and that represents the 16% of water on the face value.
Right.
And those are, as I said, we are now focusing on inspections of 20 acre-feet or greater, so those should pick up, hopefully, most of those. Some of those other diverters may be the registrants, the small domestic registrants, and the livestock stock pond certificate people holders. But we are focusing in on the non-responders is our priority work, and down to 20 acre-feet now, throughout all of these watersheds.
Yeah, okay.
We have one speaker card.
It's about a month ago we were talking about the volume of complaints received, and it was maybe 2 or 3 times more this year than last. Has that continued to outpace last year's level?
Yes, the complaints are increasing. They are smaller complaints, and we have dedicated additional resources to do complaints, especially in the curtailed watersheds.
So, Board Member Spivey Weber, I appreciate you raising that concern about those that have not responded. I've spent a lot of time with staff on this over the last few weeks, and this is an area that I'm very concerned about because as the ag member on the board, I'm out and about in ag communities, and I fear that the word out on the street is that we are not enforcing in this area. In fact, I've had a number of people tell me specifically that they think that we are doing inspections with respect to people that have already submitted the notices. And I raised this at a board meeting several months ago, saying that my preference is that we do focus on those that have not responded to the notice. And I do understand staff's logic that doing the inspections with respect to the larger diverters, where you find a violation, that's quite a bit of water. And so that really should be a target. But I remain concerned with respect to us not following up sooner on those that have not submitted forms. So I think we need to have, maybe more of a presence out in the field and following up, as staff is saying now, the priority is to focus on those that have not submitted the forms.
Yeah, I hear staff as being very responsive to what it was you raised the last time. Am I missing something?
Well, what I raised last time was that, in fact, I'll just remind everyone, Bill Lyons, former Secretary of Food and Ag, contacted me saying that he submitted a form and that he got an inspection. And based on what I'm hearing from staff, I think he probably got an inspection because he's a larger diverter. And so the priority was to do inspections on the larger diverters, regardless of whether they had submitted the form. And he was raising the concern and also, coffee shop talk, letting me know that the word out on the street was that we were not following up on those that hadn't submitted the forms. And it sounds like now the focus is going to be on the smaller diverters, including those that haven't submitted the forms. So I raised this today to thank staff for, we've talked quite a bit over the last couple of weeks. Thank them for shifting this focus on those that haven't submitted the forms, including the smaller diverters, and am raising it before you all and for the public and the web and anyone that's listening to make sure folks know that we take this seriously and that we have enforcement staff and inspection staff out in the field.
Yes, and that is our priority. The key is that we're looking at failure to file, and then the size parameter, but also that we're looking at people that have water rights that allow diversions during this period, you know, because we have a lot of curtailed water rights that are potentially for collection of water to storage in the future, so we don't want to spend our resources inspecting those at this time. So we want to make sure we're inspecting diversions that can occur during this time, and we're not inspecting from 0 to 20, but from 20 acre-feet up. I just want to clarify our priorities. And non-responders is the key. Now, at that same time, if these water right holders hold another water right for an adjacent project, we are inspecting that as well. And if they did a report for that, then that would include another inspection. So we're trying to be efficient and looking at all the water rights as we do these projects.
That's right. Yes, Eric.
Morning, Eric Oppenheimer, Office of Research Planning and Performance. I'm going to give you a quick update on the emergency water conservation regulations, mainly focusing on the first set of water production reporting data that were due last Friday, August 15th.
Oh, yeah.
So based on information provided by Department of Water Resources, there's 452 agencies that are considered urban water suppliers under the Water Code. So these are the larger suppliers, generally with more than 3,000 customers. There's 37 of these 452 that are actually wholesalers and don't need to report under the regulations. So that brings the total number of reporting suppliers down to about 415. Well, early last week, Monday, August 11th of last week, we actually sent direct mail out to roughly more than 90% of these suppliers. There's still some for whom we don't have contact information for, letting them know about the new online reporting tool and reminding them of the requirement that they need to submit their water production data and other information by the 15th. In addition, Aqua was very helpful, and they sent out emails to all of their membership and posted information on their website. So we feel like we've reached the vast majority of the target audience at this point. So in terms of results, as of yesterday afternoon, we've now received reports from 282 of those 415 suppliers. So we're about up to 68% of the water suppliers that we should be getting reports from responding and providing the reports. As a next step, we're going to be following up with the suppliers that we didn't receive reports from, but I think it's important to point out that there's generally a number of reasons. First, I think there's some suppliers that probably are still unaware, although I think that's a relatively small group. As I mentioned, we've really tried to get the word out. I think there's some suppliers that are probably running into some technical difficulties just reporting the information through the online reporting tool, and we're going to work and assist them in getting their information in and make sure that everything's going smoothly. Lastly, I'm aware of a handful of suppliers that intend to report but just haven't yet, and I think that's somewhat understandable given that our email went out August 11th. It's just we've just been on a very short timeline, and the reports were due August 15th, so that wasn't a very long period of time for them to respond. And lastly, and hopefully this is a small group, there's potentially some suppliers that are aware but don't plan on reporting at all. But as I said, as a next step, we're going to be following up with all of the suppliers that haven't reported, and after we follow up with them and we maximize participation in the reporting, we're going to be going through the data. Based on our experience with this survey, there's going to be a short period where we're going to have to go through and correct data and figure out where there's errors and circle back with those suppliers. But our plan right now is to come back to the board with an information item on September 9th. That would include, among other things, an analysis of the results that we received for the months of June and July, which is the data that we're now receiving. In addition to the information on the water supply reporting or the water production reporting, I also just wanted to mention that we have now received 3 alternate plans. As you remember, as part of the regulation, urban water suppliers can propose alternate plans that include allocation-based rate structures in lieu of invoking a specific stage of their water shortage contingency plan. Those allocation-based rate structure plans have to satisfy the requirements of the Water Code. It's Water Code Section 370 through 374. And so far, like I said, we've received 3. One from Moulton Nigel Water District, one from Irvine Ranch Water District, and one from the Truckee Donner Public Utility District. So initially going through those, it appears that the first 2, Moulton Nigel and Irvine Ranch, their allocation-based rate structures do appear to be consistent with the Water Code requirements that establish what an allocation rate structure must include. The Truckee Donner PUD rate structure does not appear to comply with the Water Code requirements. We're going to be going through all 3 plans and any additional plans we get and making a recommendation for the executive director, who will either approve or disapprove each of the plans. And that's all I have for you, unless there's questions.
Questions? It sounds thoughtful.
Chair Marcus?
Yes.
Can I just mention that we always envisioned that this very first official reporting period under the regulations would be kind of a shakeout period. So Eric mentioned the short time frame for folks to access the tool, be able to get their login, et cetera. And so as we move forward, we would be proposing in the coming months that we would provide an informational update to you on the reported information and the board meeting immediately following the submittal of that information. And that will generally be the first board meeting of each month, so that we have an opportunity to at least collate the information.
Right, and you anticipate a higher response rate by the next reporting?
We certainly hope so. I will just mention, following on the last conversation about enforcement related to curtailments, there are always enforcement tools available to us if we find that there are in fact urban water suppliers under the definition provided in the Water Code and required by our regulations to submit reports that are actually not doing so.
Yeah, you know, and this has been a rapid timeline, though, as was noted, August 11th to 15th, right? People might not have even been in the office, kind of thing, during summer. But Eric, could you comment on some of the ramp up to this in terms of the online reporting tool? You know, we worked with Aqua and representatives, and also our new division of drinking water was involved. I mean, real briefly, could you comment on, because that wasn't just August 11th, that was leading up to then.
Right. So you adopted the regulations mid-July, and then the Office of Administrative Law finalized the regulations that became effective. I believe it was July 29th. During that 2-week period, we'd been working with some new staff in the Division of Drinking Water. Actually, Mark Emerson, who's been really helpful, and it's been actually a good example of being able to tap into some new resources and some new experience. Technical experience that we didn't previously have, and he was able to develop a very effective and simple tool, online reporting tool. So we took that initial tool, we provided a link to it to Aqua, and they again have been very helpful and agreed to do some testing. So they selected about 10 water agencies to test it. The Aqua membership who tested it generally had very positive feedback, which was encouraging, but did have some comments. So during that period, we made some changes to the tool based on the comments that we received. And that's why it kind of took us to August 11th, which really isn't a lot of time when you consider, it was less than a month before the board adopted the regulation. So we've been moving quickly, and we've also been asking the water suppliers to move quickly. And so far, there have been, so as Karen mentioned, some technical issues with login and establishing, a way to get onto the tool, but we're working through all that. Seems to be going, well from my perspective. I think we will see an increase in that number of 68% participation. I think we'll see a significant increase. Board member Moore, as you mentioned, when we, a lot of people are actually out. When we sent the email out, in fact, I did receive a lot of bounce backs, on vacation for a week or two. So, I think we'll definitely be seeing better participation.
Great. Thank you.
I just want to thank the staff for moving so fast. I mean, it was really, really impressive. And it's sort of in the spirit of the last item, for those urban water agencies that are unaccustomed to our moving quite so fast, this is the new world. Welcome, and it's really quite a feat. And thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. We should also say thank you to the folks who complied very quickly, too. Right. It's not just it's a half full versus half empty. All right. One speaker, Tim O'Laughlin, SJTA. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, board members. Hopefully you've had a vacation. I've heard your staff has, so hopefully you've been able to get away as well. I was curious, just a question, since Mr. O'Hagan's sitting here. They had 600 inspections. I was wondering how many follow-up enforcement actions on those 600 inspections that they've had to take, if any.
We have not issued an enforcement action. We are considering some enforcement actions.
Okay, thanks. I'm here on the drought and the continuing drought and issues that may be coming up in the next 3 to 6 months. And if you could bear with me, these all kind of interrelate, and hopefully I can get through it in my 2.5 minutes, but I doubt that. Okay, so the first one is we've sent a letter to Barbara Evoy requesting a clarification on the lifting of the curtailment for post-1914 curtailment notice. So you've adopted your emergency regs, but you haven't issued any orders under those. So we're under the impression that we're still operating under the old notice of curtailment.
Right.
And the old notice of curtailment didn't have anything specific in it. It just said at some point in time we may lift curtailment. So we've proposed some suggestions to your staff. We'd like to meet with your staff, hopefully get something developed. As you know, storage in the San Joaquin Valley is dropping dramatically. And we feel it's imperative that if storms occur early in the system, that we have the ability to capture and put water in storage as quickly as possible for the new year, because we don't know what it will bring. So we got that letter to your staff, and hopefully we'll be able to sit down and work with your staff and get that issue resolved and clarified so there's more certainty on when the post-14 curtailment in regards to storage would be lifted. Is that okay? Sure. Okay. Next, next one.
Will you promise to ask if it's okay after everything else you ever say?
Yes, I know.
At the
No, just on that one. That's an important issue. If you've looked at reservoir levels lately in the San Joaquin River Basin, they are dropping dramatically over the last 4 to 6 weeks. Next one up. The other one is October flow requirements at Vernalis are coming up. Currently, Vernalis is running at around 300 to 325 CFS. 250 CFS is being released from the Stanislaus, which basically feeds right into Vernalis. The requirement during the October time period is 1,000 CFS for 30 days as an average, so we're short. My expectation is that number will shrink. So the districts have been talking to and have sent a letter to the Bureau. The Bureau, pursuant to D1641, is responsible for meeting the requirement, but there has to be some discussion about what we're going to do about pulse flows, not only in the San Joaquin River Basin, but probably in Sacramento. We're very much concerned about fish stranding and red dewatering. We had severe red dewatering problems on the Stanislaus River in 2010, and we don't want to see that happen again. Next issue.
Thanks for flagging that.
Okay, curtailment 2015. So this is coming from just one watershed in the San Joaquin River Basin, but in talking to our hydrology and geologist people on the Stanislaus River, it appears that with antecedent conditions in the basin, that in order to effectuate a normal runoff, we're going to need somewhere between 20% to 40% additional rainfall. So if you think about that, if you had a 100% year and you think you're going to